We have a really exciting election in the community. We have two qualified candidates who are running. We have Assemblyman Dov Heiken. The Assemblyman, of course, has been serving in the New York State Assembly for the last 32 years. We have an attorney, Nachman Kahler, a community activist who is a Mechaber's Forum and has been very involved in a lot of public policy issues, including housing and fighting casinos in the Catskills. And they are slugging it out appropriately, talking about the issues that matter. And one of the issues that has come up is the issue of housing. Now, housing is always a very challenging issue. I myself worked on the housing issue. I actually got out there and I had an idea. On 19th Avenue, there is a sanitation depot. And when I was running, I said, hey, why don't we simply take the sanitation depot and either knock it down and build housing on top and then put a sanitation depot on the first floor, or let us move it elsewhere. And so I thought, hey, this would be great. And in fact, as somebody who's a council member, I'm always looking for opportunities to build affordable housing. So what did I do? When I got elected, I met with the sanitation commissioner. And my first request was, I would like to buy the sanitation depot from you. The commissioner looked at me and said, what are you talking about? I want to buy a sanitation depot. Let's find a different place to put it. It's in the heart of the community on 19th Avenue. Let's knock it down and build a few hundred units of housing. The commissioner said, listen, here's my problem. I cannot have a situation for political and practical reasons where I have a depot that's outside of the community board. So if you can find a different location for the depot that's suitable, I'm open to that. So we looked, and unfortunately we were not able to find a different location that was suitable based on those dimensions. So I came back and said, listen, I can't find another location. What about, let me knock it down. We'll have a temporary space, and then we will allow you to use the depot on the first floor, and then the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh floors will be housing. So the commissioner said, listen, I got to tell you, it's a good idea, but the truth is I did this once before, and what happened was that unfortunately, once it got built again, and once you had a situation where people were living there, they complained, and eventually they got the depot to shut down. He referred to a situation on Staten Island that he felt was similar, and so he said, listen, I am not going to help you do this. And despite my best attempts in speaking to top administration officials and trying to convince them, their bottom line was, it's a good idea, it is doable, but we are not going to let you do it. So what should I do? Should I give up? Should I say, okay, that's it, it's done? We keep looking for opportunities, and now, Baruch Hashem, I've moved up in the process. I've only been a council member for 4 years. I've been very fortunate. Hatziyat D'Shmaya. I am now the chairman of the Land Use Committee of the City Council. The last 9 months, 10 months actually, I chair the Land Use Committee, which oversees zoning and actually focuses on development and trying to change the zoning so that we can, in fact, build housing. But that's just only a piece of it, because really there's a lot of different moving parts. And during the campaign that we've had go on, one of the candidates actually came up with what I thought was a very intriguing idea. I say intriguing because anytime you hear an idea, you say, hey, let me vet this idea, let me get the information. And the candidate is Nachman Kahler, who's an attorney and a housing expert. He said, listen, he said, I don't understand. He said, along 61st Street, from 8th Avenue all the way to 14th Avenue, and everybody's familiar with this, 61st Street, if you drive down, you'll see some stores on one side, but on the other side, you'll see a big wall. What's behind that wall? Well, that's the Long Island Railroad. They call it the Bay Ridge Line. The Long Island Railroad is there. It's not heavily used, but it is used, and it's a full city block. And we're talking about literally from 8th Avenue all the way to 14th Avenue. So it's quite a few blocks. And he says, hey, why can't we build housing on top of the Long Island Railroad? That's actually a very interesting idea. Now, what does it have to do with the state? Well, it's obvious. The Long Island Railroad is owned by the MTA, and of course the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, is in fact a state agency, and they would have to agree. So I said, you know what? People called me and said, what do you think of this idea? I said, Councilman Greenfield, you've been looking at trying to build housing for years. You've tried your best. You haven't been able to get it done yet. This is an idea. What do you think? I said, listen, I'm intrigued. I'm skeptical, but I'm intrigued. So I took some time, and I actually reached out to Nachman Kahler and said, listen, send me the data. Let me see what you have. To his credit, he actually has a fully formed plan. He sent me some documents. He sent me some backgrounds. He sent me the deed. I looked at it. I spoke to housing experts. I spoke to folks who are experts in zoning. I spoke to folks who are experts in housing finance. And most importantly, and this is really the most critical part, and I waited until this part, until I said this plan is doable, and that is I met this week with top officials from the MTA that have the authority. They have the authority to sign off on a plan like this that would allow us to build on top of the Long Island Railroad cut on 61st Street. I met with them. And I sat with them, and we discussed, and they told me about other projects that they've done, whether it's the West Side, whether it's downtown Brooklyn, the feasibility, the costs, and they told me, they said, you know what, Councilman? This is an idea that actually makes sense, and if there was support from this idea from yourself and from other elected officials in the community, we would move along with the process of putting this to a RFP. What does that mean? That means that they would go out and they would give the opportunity for developers to turn around and to say, hey, this is what we'd like to do with this property. We'd like to build X high. We'd like to build housing. We'd like to build some stores on the first floor. We might want to put in some schools, some shuls. They said we would do that, but it's important for us to know that you as the council member, plus as the chair of the land use committee, that you in fact support this. This is a unique time. Can you imagine I'm sitting here with the MTA, and the MTA now says, will you support this? And I said, of course I will support this. Who will not support an initiative that could lead to 2,000 units of brand new housing in our community? And so they said, well, if you're supportive and we can get the rest of the community elected officials to be supportive, we, at this point, they told me we're going to move on with the process, moving towards an RFP where any developer can apply and they can look at this project and they can say, here's what we want to do, because we know that it has your support, and we're hopeful that we'll get more support from the other elected officials in the community. And to me, this is an incredible, incredible big breakthrough. And once again, I want to run through the process, because people say, oh, you know, what's going to happen? You're going to build housing overnight? Of course not. It's impossible. I mean, think about it. To build a regular house can take a year, right? I mean, just to buy the property, do the plans, it could take over a year. And you've seen people build houses. I've seen people all over the neighborhood. My neighbors have bought their pieces of property. They knock down a house. They have to come up with a design. They get approvals. They build it. The process can take a year and a half for one house. Obviously, this is a process that's going to take a few years. Nobody thinks that you're going to be able to build 2,000 units of brand new housing overnight. That's ridiculous. But let's run through the process. The process is really several steps. The first step is we have to get the MTA to agree to allow a developer, and it would be a private developer, who would come in and who would say, listen, this makes sense. We can make money. We can do this. And we can have a project that would still benefit the community. A private developer can come in, and a private developer would make offers to the MTA and say, listen, here's how much we're willing to pay you for the right to build on top of your rail yards. The good news is that based on my meeting with the top MTA officials, they told me that from their perspective, they're willing to move on with the process where they would open this up to a developer. At that point, the MTA would have to pick the developer based on a variety of criteria. The first is they want to make sure the developer's actually done something like this before, that they have the ability to get it done, that they have the money and the financing and a plan, and of course based on what they think they could make the MTA, and they're not looking to make $1 gazillion, but it is a piece of property, and they're going to unload it, and they're looking to make a few bucks. So that's the second thing, and that basically is when you're going to have a request for proposal. They're going to read proposals, they're going to come back. Then they're going to select a developer, and they'll make an agreement with that developer, right? That process alone, once again, from the start till that point, could easily take a year. Just think about that. Now, once there's a developer, the developer has to come up with the plans and say, hey, here's what I'd like to build. Now, just to give you a sense for folks, because, you know, I've actually, once again, like I said, I've thoroughly vetted this. It's not something I said, oh, that's a good idea, we're going to do that. No, absolutely not. I take my position very seriously, and especially since I've become chair of the Land Use Committee, I do these things every single day. Every single day I get a different project in front of me, and I've gotten lots of projects that are mega. Right now I'm dealing with a project in Queens as the chair of the Land Use Committee called Astoria Cove. They're looking to build 1,700 units of housing in Astoria, Queens. We did a project in Williamsburg where they were looking to build close to 2,000 units. We built a project in the West Side. We did 1,500 units. This isn't chalamis. This is practicality. We see this every single week. You know, sometimes you have to tell people, well, you know, if we could invent cars and we could invent planes and we could put a man on the moon, we could get this done. No, please. This isn't such a big stretch. There are massive developments all over the city that are getting built every single year in this city. Literally developments with thousands of units, from 1,500 to 2,500 units. Every single year, we see 3, 4, 5 a year of these projects. So this is something that is actually very doable and, quite frankly, is done all the time. So let's just talk about the logistics just so people understand. So we're talking about 61st Street, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about, and this is where it will be abutted. when you think about it, the major swath over here, and the part that would be very significant, is 8th to 9th Avenue, 9th Avenue to Fort Hamilton, Fort Hamilton to 10th, 10th to 11th, 11th to 12th, 12th to 13th, 13th to 14th. Right? So a lot of people say, well, how are you going to build that much? The answer is that we're looking over here at 7 blocks. We're not talking about jamming everything into one neighborhood. Right? We're not talking about one block, we're going to have 2,000 units. We could do that, incidentally. By the way, you could build a tower that's 50 stories tall, but that's not what the community would want or, quite frankly, support or be ready for. So really what we're looking at is you have to look at a plan. So when you look at a plan, when you look at these blocks from 8th Avenue to 14th Avenue, of which, just so that you know, 8th Avenue to 13th Avenue is currently available, and 13th to 14th, the air rights, in fact, have already been sold. So developers are, in fact, interested in this idea, right? So if you look at it from 8th Avenue to 14th Avenue, and you say, hey, what do we have over here? So I'm just going to get a little bit technical, but for the experts that are listening, just so they can appreciate this, I say quote-unquote experts, because a lot of experts who are out there, you know, the folks who have been working on housing for 40 years in the community and haven't gotten anything done, say, well, you can't get it done. Well, it's very easy to say you can't get something done when you haven't gotten it done before. So give somebody else a chance to get it done, right? I mean, so the experts who are out there, just so they understand, we're talking about approximately 790,000 square feet. Now, how does that work, right? So the zoning is very interesting, which is that every single property in New York City is zoned, which means that, for example, your house, you can't knock down your house and make a supermarket. And you think about it, you say, why not? It's America. Why can't I just knock down my house and make a supermarket? The answer is because your neighbors would probably be very upset if you had a Quickie Mart 24/7 in your house instead of your house. So we have zoning, and the zoning specifically says, for example, is it commercial or is it residential? That's the first thing. Or in some cases, it might be manufacturing. In other cases, we might be mixed use. But generally, commercial residential is the main piece. So if you have a residential, you might have something called a commercial overlay, so that you can have on the first floor stores, and then on top of that, you could have housing units. So really, if you look at something like this, probably what would make the most sense, I'm not committing to this earlier, I just want people, especially those quote-unquote experts who are listening, to understand, you'd be looking at something, for example, like an R7A. So what's an R7A? An R7A basically means that you can build 4 FAR. So what does FAR mean? FAR is the floor area ratio. That means you can multiply the 790,000 square feet times 4, which is 3.16 million square feet. And then you can divide that by, let's say, 1250, which is the average size of an apartment, 1,250 square feet. And then you'll find out that you're left with approximately 2,600 apartments. Okay, that's a pretty big deal. Now, you don't have to maximize. You don't have to build every apartment. I'll tell you why. Because this requirement, because a lot of people have called me and said, well, what about the parking? Well, guess what? The R7A zoning requires 50% parking. So if you're going to have 2,000 units, you're going to have 1,000 parking spots. So don't worry about that. That's not an issue at all. And once again, a lot of this is next to public transportation, and this is a major road, and you've got buses and subways. So 1,000 parking spots should certainly suffice over here in this area. So when you're looking at something like this, and you're talking about it, and you're saying, okay, we can build up to 2,600 or so units, right? You don't have to maximize 2,600 units because you might want to have some space, you might want to have some open space, you might want to build a shul, you might want to build a community center. So let's talk about it practically. A developer will look at it and say, okay, I'll build 20% less, that's 2,000 units. 2,000 units is a lot of units. And so then people ask, well, what about affordability? Well, the answer is that part of our condition would be we would work with the developer. We'd work with the developer to make sure that this housing is mostly affordable. So what does that mean when you say affordable? So the answer is, and this gets a little bit complicated, but once again, I'm saying this for the experts who are listening, when we talk about affordability, there's something called area median income, which basically, it's complicated, but the short story is it depends on how much money you make and how many kids you have, and based on that, that's how much you pay. So for example, some units would be for people who make very little money, and other units would be for people who make more money, and then you'd have a nice mix, right? Because you don't really want to have a housing development that only has poor people or only has rich people. It doesn't really make sense. You want to have a nice, healthy mix, which is really what Borough Park is all about today. So, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's say a family with 5 kids. Pretty common in the community, right? A family with 5 kids. A family with 5 kids who's making up to $62,460 a year. For a 3-bedroom apartment, they would pay $1,308 a month. That's a pretty good deal. But once again, remember, they only make $62,500 a year, and they have a family with 5 kids, right? Father, mother, 5 kids. However, if you take the same family and now they're making $105,000 a year, well, they would pay more. They would pay, in that particular case, $2,100 a month. And that makes sense because if you're making more money, you're paying more money. And so you have a mix of incomes. You have people who are making less, people who are making more, and you'd have some units that are market rate. But ultimately, a lot of people would benefit because let me tell you something about Borough Park. The people who are making $100,000 a year, they can't find affordable housing. They're looking at 3 bedrooms that are going for $2,800, $2,900, $3,000 a month. If they're lucky, they can even find it. Many of them can't even find it. And certainly the people who are making $65,000 a year, they definitely can't find the housing. And for them, there's no way they could ever find a unit for $1,300. It's impossible. So that's really what you would end up with. You'd end up with a very nice mix of units. A very nice mix of units. So now, a lot of people, and I'm going to take your questions, by the way, in just a couple of minutes because I want people to call in. We want to encourage vigorous debate on this issue. We're talking about the bold housing plan proposed by Nachman Collar. And once again, I just want to make it clear, I'm not endorsing in this race, similar to the mayor's race. I have a lot of friends. I had a lot of friends running in that race. I certainly respect both candidates running in this race, but I'm talking about an idea that's been proposed by one of the candidates, which is legitimate. So let's just talk about some of the questions that people have asked. The first thing that people ask is to say, why do we need more housing in Borough Park? You know, let them move. Well, the reality is that a lot of families who live in Borough Park, they want their kids to live there. They want their grandkids to live there. A lot of people who live in Borough Park, they want to live next to their Rebbe. They want to live next to their Rav. It's a very unique neighborhood, right? I mean, so especially if you're a chassid, for example, right? You want to be next to your Rebbe. You don't want to be 5 miles away walking to shul in Borough Park. It's very unique. It's not comparable to other communities. People really want to live in the community. And that's something that I think is incredibly important for people to understand. So, folks, listen, here's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up the lines. I want people to call in 718-303-9090, 718-303-9090. You can call us live right now at Councilman David Greenfield. We're going to be talking about the housing plan that has been proposed by Nachman Collar. It's a unique plan. It's something that I have vetted, and while I'm not endorsing Nachman Collar or Assemblyman Dov Hikind, I think they're both qualified candidates, and you should decide. I am, however, supporting the plan because I think that we desperately need more housing. Now, folks, I want to just make it clear. We're talking about housing. I don't want people to come and knock either one of the candidates. I know it's a few days before Election Day. People feel passionate. This is not the show. We're not going to use this as a forum to attack people. It's not what we do. We've never done it before. We're talking about one issue, which is a unique idea that's been brought up to the community, that the idea that I'm supporting, which is let's build more housing. 718-303-9090, 718-303-9090. So just to finish the process, what happens then is that we would look at changing the zoning. The zoning would allow for more FAR. There would be certain building height restrictions. For example, on a R7A, you could not build more than 8 stories high. You'd have to obviously have parking, like we'd explained. 50% of the units would have to have parking. And then you would begin the Euler process, which is the land review process. And the land review process that we would review would go to city planning. Then once city planning certifies it, it will go to the community board, the borough president, back to city planning. Finally, it would come to the New York City Council, where, as the chairman, I would be overseeing the final stage of approval, and that's when it will be approved. And once that's approved, then the developer could build. A process like this could easily take 4 to 5 years just to understand. So it's not overnight, but we got to think about the future. One of the biggest problems we have in our community is very few people are willing to think about the future. This is our community. We hope to live here for many, many more years and generations. Amir Tzashem. We need to start thinking about housing for the future, and that's what we're doing here today. Rifki from Flatbush, you're live on the air with New York City Councilman David Greenfield. What's your question or comment about the housing plan in Borough Park?
Okay, first I just wanted to tell you, I do publicly thank you, and your office, thank you, because you've helped me with an issue that I'm trying to deal with, and especially Jessica. So I wanted to say that.
Jessica, fantastic. And Rifki, let me just add, by the way, one of the things that people asked me and said, there's no way you could do this when you get elected, was I said that I would have more office hours than any other elected official, and on Thursday nights, I would be open all day from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. People can test me, by the way. 718-853-2704. You can call in. My office is open right now. We're there to help you. But if you want to call on this radio show, call 718-303-9090. So what's your question or comment on the housing plan that's been proposed by Reb Nachman Collar?
Okay, so this is also one of my things, because I could definitely use the affordable housing. So I was just wondering, because I've called in the past when they were talking about, building by the Culver with SEPCO, and they kept saying it's being held up by government, and I've been calling them for like over 7 years about what's going on. They keep saying it's being held up. We don't have the funding. It's not.
So you're wondering what happened to Culver L?
So I wondered if this is going to be something like, is this going to be
excellent question?
To get done further,
excellent question. Culver L. So that's actually a very good question. So there is some promising news. I actually work very closely with with SEPCO. In fact, I've been working with them hand in hand over the last few weeks, really the last few years, but the last few weeks especially. We're trying to close the Culver L project. The Culver L was a little bit different. Let me tell you why, honestly, that project got slowed down. There was a very unique feature that happened in Culver L, which we're not talking about happening over here, and that is that SEPCO got the property for free. Now, let me tell you why that's unique. Because when the government is giving something away for free, as you can imagine, Rifki, they're not super enthusiastic about giving it away, right? In this particular case, what we're talking about is where a developer would pay the MTA a fee for the right to develop the property. But the answer is that Culver L is a very small project. They have had challenges. It is a not-for-profit. It is difficult financing a project when you're not a corporation. And that's why the model that we're looking at really would be a business where someone would do it for profit. There's nothing wrong with people making money. Gesundheit, make money, and as long as you build. And by the way, if you look at every successful project, whether you look at the project in Williamsburg, the Domino project, or the project in Astoria Cove, or the project that we approved a few weeks ago on West 57th Street, these are all projects with 1,500 or more units. And let me tell you what they all have in common is people are trying to make money. And there's nothing wrong with making money because we benefit because you have more housing and you also get a set-aside of affordable housing. So that's the answer to your question. Rifki, I want to give other calls an opportunity, but thank you so much for calling, and thanks for keep calling our office. Whatever you need, we're there for you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Maisha, you're live on the air with Councilman David Greenfield. People can call in once again. It's Councilman David Greenfield, Thursday night, 7:25 p.m. Call in 718-303-9090. We're talking about Nachman Coller's bold housing plan. We're not getting involved in politics. We're not picking sides. We're simply talking about a legitimate, important issue in our community, which is how can we build housing? And we have someone who came up with a plan that I have vetted and reviewed. Maisha, what is your question on the housing plan that would build housing along 61st Street in Borough Park?
Yes, good evening, David. It's Moshe. How are you doing? I know about this project since 1997. It was called Brooklyn Junction. It was proposed by Charlie Cack way back, and he had the ear rights. He was supposed to buy he had the opportunity to buy the MTA. The question everybody has right now is, does somebody own the ear rights, or somebody has the rights to buy the ear rights?
Okay, so the answer to your question is two things. First of all, that was a very different project. That was a commercial project, which is very significantly different. That was only one particular block. Plus, the other thing to keep in mind is that project obviously was opposed by the local elected officials at the time, if you recall. So it's very different. It's apples and oranges, and quite frankly, over 20 years, things obviously will change. But the answer to your question is very clear, and that is that from 8th to 9th, 9th to Fort Hamilton to 10th, 10th to 11th, 11th to 12th, 12th and 13th, that is currently unowned. 13th to 14th is in fact owned, so most of it is unowned, and even the one block that is owned right now, they can't build housing anyway, so when we would change the zoning, they would build housing too, so they would be part of the project. Thank you so much for your call. Avram, you're live on the air with New York City Councilman David Greenfield. Thank you for calling. We're talking about the bold housing project that has been proposed by Nachman Coller. Once again, folks, callers, we're not talking politics, we're just talking policy. 718-303-9090 is our number. 718-303-9090. We're getting a lot of calls, so please be patient. We will get to you, and we have to wrap up soon because we have the governor calling in, and we don't want the lines to be jammed for the governor. So, Avram, what is your question or comment about this plan?
Thank you for addressing this topic. First, from an infrastructure perspective, just to build something on a platform, and also to be able to allow trains to run under, there would have to be mechanical and exhaust systems. So it would cost a lot for a developer to do it. So how could the MTA offer a bigger price?
So the answer is that is in fact part of exactly what the MTA is in the middle of studying, which is the cost. And that is a process that has been done. The MTA has told me that they do not expect the cost will be as high as in other projects because this particular stretch of the station is in fact, the stretch of line is not as utilized as other stations are, for example, on the west side or in downtown Brooklyn. And that's obviously going to be factored in to the price. And once again, Avram, no one is suggesting over here that this is going to be a freebie. That's absolutely not the case. We're not saying that this is going to be one of these projects where we're giving away apartments for free. Absolutely not. This is going to be a mixed project that's going to have market rate, and it's also going to have affordable, and the affordable is going to be a mix, like we said. If you're making $62,000 a year or less, a family of 7, 3-bedroom apartment, you'll pay around $1,300 a month. If you're making $105,000, the same family, you'll pay around $2,100 a month. So we're certainly not suggesting that this is a freebie or that it's not going to require money. This is a significant project, and in fact, of course it will require money, and that's what's going to make the project work, because quite frankly, when a project is capitalistic, it actually can get done. Thanks for calling. Heshi from Flatbush, you're live on the air with Councilman David Greenfield. Heshi from Flatbush, you're live on the air with Councilman David Greenfield. Heshi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. So talk to me.
The last few days I've been hearing, they're going to build, everyone wants to live in Borough Park and all that. I mean, maybe this was the base of Migdosh that fit, a million Jews inside. But it's impossible to fit, more than fits in here. And
we're talking about, Heshi, we're talking about 7 blocks. Stop. Let's take a second over here. We're not talking about...
I have a way.
Heshi, let me just finish the point. It's a very important point. Because a lot of people say, we're talking about, how is it possible? First of all, like I said, if you really wanted to build on one block 50 stories high, you can fit thousands of people. We're not talking about that. We're talking about over the course of 7 blocks, 8th to 9th Avenue, 9th to Fort Hamilton to 10th, 10th to 11th, 11th to 12th, 12th to 13th, 13th to 14th. That's a lot of blocks. And when we talk about these blocks,
what are you talking about?
we're talking about 61st Street, which is where we have the cut, the LIRR, where we have the cut. And that is exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, but that's not going to fit the whole Borough Park, and you're talking about...
We're not talking about... Listen to me. You can't solve every single person in Borough Park's problems, but if you can build 2,000 new units, of which you have a mix of units that are now available, plus you have affordable units, plus you have other units, you're talking about a situation where you're improving the situation. I can't build 100,000 units, Hesh. Yes.
There is a solution, too, another solution.
I'm listening.
You can move people from all the way from 40th Street all the way to 60th Street. Very simple. The whole New Utrecht Avenue, nobody seems to want to move in under the train. And they have a tremendous amount of houses there that have big rooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, and nobody moves in there for some reason.
Okay, but Heshi, I hear what you're saying, but I can't
live in the basement.
Heshi, I hear you, but I can't force people to move into New Utrecht. If we build brand new housing, people will be excited. I'm asking you about this specific concept. Over the course of 7 blocks, to build 2,000 units of brand new housing, I just said it could take 4 or 5 years. It's not overnight, but our housing crisis is not disappearing. We got kids, we got grandkids coming out. People are coming to Borough Park from around the world. I think you'd have to agree that it's certainly worth the effort. Thank you so much, Heshi, for calling. We appreciate it. And we're going to take our final call because we have the governor will be up with us next. Norman from Brooklyn, you're live on the air with Councilman David Greenfield. We're talking about the housing plan, the bold housing plan that's been proposed by Nachman Kahler. It talks about developing over the Borough Park rail yards along 61st Street. What's your question or comment on this plan?
Yeah, okay. I'm sure you remember when you were running, you said you're going to take the sanitation.
Norman, I already addressed this. Norman, you got to listen to the show. You can't just call and not listen to the show. I already addressed the issue. I specifically said exactly what happened, and I want to say it again because all the wise guys asked the same question. It's very funny because Dov Hikian right now, he's campaigning, rightfully so. He says he's going to try to get the garbage trucks off the roads. Now, let's just think about this for a second. Simcha Felder tried to get the garbage trucks off the road. Dov Hikian tried to get the garbage trucks off the road. I've tried to get the garbage trucks off the road. Dov Hikian says he's going to try again. Does that mean that he can't do it? Of course not, because let's hate. We want people to keep on trying on issues. Let me tell you something. When I first started going, Simcha Felder, you know how many years Simcha Felder, our great senator, has been working on trying to reform special ed? For years and years, since he's been in the city council. He's passionate about the issue. He just got it done last year. It took him years and years. TAP. You know what TAP is? TAP was a project that Dov Hikind, in his own press release, said he worked on for 10 years. So should he have given up? Of course not. Priority 5. I spent 4 years in the city council until I got money back for Priority 5. I got $10 million back. Parks, it took me 4.5 years to get $15 million for every single park. Parking tickets, it took me time to pass laws. I had to spend time to pass laws. A 5-minute grace period that I had to pass so that people shouldn't get tickets while they're going to pay the muni meters. I just passed a law that does 3 things. I passed it a little bit over a year ago, in fact. The first is it shuts the muni meters off when you don't have receipts. It specifically shuts the muni meters off when it's no longer in function. So, for example, after 7 o'clock, so people shouldn't accidentally put in money. And it also allows to prepay. It also allows you to prepay the meters. And in fact, that's something that was very publicly announced. That's not happening right now. But in Meretz Hashem, it's going to be happening after my legislation, Local Law 49. It will be happening later in next year. Things take years. So the idea that I tried something and I wasn't able to do it, what should I do? I should give up? I did everything I could. I did it in good faith. I had an idea. I went to sanitation department. I tried to convince them to sell me the depot so that I could build housing on top, and underneath I could put it in the depot, and they said no. They said absolutely not. And I appealed, and I went to the deputy mayor and to the top officials, and they all said no. What am I supposed to do? I should quit. That's it. Go home? That's not the American spirit. It's not the spirit that any elected official has. If at first you don't succeed, try again. And in this case, we have a unique situation. The MTA has actually said yes. They said, we're willing to do it. We're willing to work with you. So we have a yes. And I'm the chairman of the Land Use Committee. So I have major influence over zoning in the city of New York, so I can help get it done as well. So I don't like the defeatist attitude. It's a little bit disappointing, right? I mean, I actually believe that we have to keep fighting on the tuition crisis. I know others do as well. So should we give up because we haven't been able to solve the tuition crisis? Of course not. Should we give up because we haven't been able to solve the fact that there are poor people in the community? Of course not. Should we give up because we haven't been able to solve the housing crisis? Of course not. We have to embrace bold ideas, and we have to work to make sure that we can get things done. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the American way. We'll be back in 30 seconds after this very short commercial break. Thank you so much.
Do you need medical equipment and supplies for yourself or someone you care for? Come to Big Apple Supplies. We carry a wide range of all mobility equipment, disposable supplies, and more with the guarantee